Thanks for clicking on Wayne.com for this season-ending edition of Inside the Zone.
It's a somber mood on a Monday.
It is. The series wrapped up against Toledo Central Division Finals with a 5-zip loss over in Game 5 at Toledo on Saturday night, so it wraps up the entire campaign. And Blake, before we talk about moving forward in the season in its entirety, let's talk about this series. What do you take away from this series with Toledo, if anything, and what stuck out to you about the series against the Walleye? Again, a 4-1 win.
Comets didn't want it enough.
That's what
I mean, that's it. I mean, they didn't want it enough to be disciplined and not take penalties, and they didn't want it enough to be disciplined and play defensively, and they just didn't want it enough. And Toledo really did. They ignored all the BS, all the post whistle stuff, and they just kept playing. They wanted it more.
When you take a look at the series, penalty kill, power play, special teams were a big issue. You're talking about
but even
six power play goals given up. Was that just more of an indicative of you saying that they didn't want it? Is it to kill penalties?
What I meant by didn't want it was the fact that they took so many penalties and the fact that they gave up so many goals in a high slot simply because they didn't get back. I mean, you can't really argue those two things. I mean, you knew Toledo had a great power play. You kept giving them chances with bonehead penalties, and that's probably the nicest way to say it. And you didn't want it enough not to do those. That's all. And you knew that going in. You knew that was their strategy. You knew that they were faster than you, that you had to be disciplined, and you had to get back, and you didn't want it enough to do that.
You mentioned bonehead penalties. I read an article from you that said they were the second least penalized team so far in the postseason, so it wasn't the number of penalties, it was just specific penalties at a given time that turned out to be the issue?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't have a lot of majors, okay, so that was why they were the second least penalized team in the playoffs. But the minors they took, I mean, half of the minors they took were in the offensive zone. I mean, you just can't do that. I mean, there's just no excuse for that.
The old Dennis Green saying when he was with the Arizona Cardinals, they are who we thought they were.
Yeah, exactly.
It kind of rings true in this series because I think 1 month into this season and throughout the second half of the season too, we talked about how it looked like Toledo, when you take a look at the Central Division, Toledo was here and there was a gap. Comets were here, and then there was another big gap, and then it was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, it was the rest of the teams. So it kind of played out how I think even in the first month of the season, many people thought that it would.
Sure. I mean, the Comets' whole plan was to see if they could get up on Toledo and see how the Walleye would react from coming down, from coming from behind. And they never really did that because they gave away the first 2 games with those penalties. I mean, they were in the games. They had the chances, and they gave them away with bad, not even defensive penalties. They were penalties in the offensive zone or the neutral zone that really didn't have anything to do with the play. I mean, they weren't disciplined enough. They didn't want it bad enough.
Moving forward, if you're the Comets, what do you take from this series that you can apply through the offseason that you can apply next year? I mean, what is the gist of this series that you can use to improve going forward?
Well, you got to decide. It's almost like you have to decide, do you want to be a regular season franchise or you want to be a playoff franchise? Because it doesn't really work both ways. I mean, Toledo got to 51 wins. If they win, they'll be the first team in 15 years, I think, to win it with 50 wins during the regular season. I mean, you can blow yourselves out in the regular season by going for everything, or you can save some for the playoffs. Are you going to be a tough team? Because that doesn't translate too well in the playoffs, depending on how the games are called or who your matchup is. And the Comets' matchup is always going to be Toledo. So you have to get past Toledo first, and you can't do that by beating them up. It doesn't work. That's been proven again and again now. 2 series in a row against Toledo, it didn't work. It might work with your Allen or your Colorado, but it doesn't matter if you can't get past Toledo.
Right.
So what do you got to figure out that way? I mean, how are you going to do that? So you've got to get younger. You've got to get a lot faster. I mean, Toledo was much faster. You've got to get more disciplined somehow, some way, whether that's the coach initiating that or the leadership in the locker room, which it didn't really happen. I mean, we talked about this for how many years now, that the locker room has to take that upon themselves to do it, and it didn't happen.
Well, you mentioned the coach. I want to start talking about the offseason and next season. Gary Graham just wrapping up the second year of his second 2-year contract with the Comets. Do you see him coming back? I mean, I would imagine that the
sure.
Comets go ahead. He's done a good job, and considering the circumstances especially.
Well, you don't have Pat Nagel, your number one goalie, for 3 months. You don't have Bobby Shea and or Gabriel Beaupre, 2 of your top 4 defensemen, for 90% of the season. You don't have a full-time assistant coach because your previous assistant coach didn't let you know till Labor Day that he was leaving. You've got all these circumstances, and yet they still got 98 points, which is just astonishing. That's crazy. You can say, yeah, they beat the teams they were supposed to. They didn't beat the better teams. Okay, that's fair. That's legit. You got to figure out how to beat Toledo, and you've got to build your personnel around that game plan. This one didn't work, so you got to make some adjustments.
When it comes to players, what is priority number 1 for the Comets in the offseason?
I think you got to build from the defense. I really do, because you got to get younger, faster. They tried heavier. They tried bigger. Not as fast, not as good moving the puck. Now, again, Beaupre and Shea would have made a big, big difference there. Shea really played well, I felt like, in the playoffs when he was playing. But you've got to get bigger. Not bigger. You've got to get faster and smarter. My gosh, does this team have to get smarter.
What do you mean by getting smarter?
I mean, you have to get smarter in learn from your mistakes. They never did. They kept making the same mistakes. How does Toledo score, 6 goals or 7 goals from the high slot? Simply because the centers don't get back defensively. How do you not learn from that, even though you know the coach is bringing it up? That's a you problem. That's not a coach problem. That's a you problem. How do you keep taking those penalties? I mean, they were dumb penalties. How do you throw an opponent's stick away to get an unsportsmanlike? I mean, some of these penalties were just brain locked, dumb. I mean, and it wasn't just that one. It was a bunch of them. You simply can't do that, and yet they kept doing it.
As far as the roster makeup goes, you've got some veteran holdovers that might be coming back, but some guys that are now going to be classified as veterans. Tell me a little bit about those guys and what you think the Comets might do going forward, and what scenarios are they presented with, because they've got decisions to make.
They got big decisions to make. You've got Will Weber, Travis Unick, Sean Sadlowski, Mike Embach, Jamie Shaftsma, Dan Milan, and I think Travis Unick. Did I say him already?
Cody Soul, too.
Cody Soul. Those are the 7 guys who are going to be classified as veterans for next season. You can only have 4. That's your first decisions right there. I mean, because that's a lot of your leadership, too. You've got to decide if you want those guys back or do you want to start over. I'm glad I don't have to make those decisions. That's really hard because those guys have meant a lot to the franchise in the ECHL. And do you start over or not? And this year they only kept 3 veterans. So you're just lucky that some other guys aren't veterans yet, like Kyle Thomas or Bobby Shea. I mean, but they will be after next year, or Garrett Thompson. So you've got an older ECHL team, which might be great for the regular season, but it hasn't proven to be great for the playoffs. So you got to decide how you want to do that. Now, do you want to go real young and then try to develop kids, which Gary Graham's done a very good job of? I mean, look at Jason Binkley this year. Look at Kyle Thomas again. Look at Gabriel Desjardins. He's done a really good job with those kids that way. Do you just start over? Or I don't think they'll start over. I think they'll go half and half. I think you'll have about 10 guys back and 10 new guys. I know Gary has some guys he's already targeted that he wants to talk to.
Goaltending situation, obviously, Nagel missed 3
was great.
months, but I know he didn't get the wins, but a lot of those goals, not necessarily his fault. Garrett Bartis, I think you can.
I don't know how you stop them when they're from the camera to me and they're shooting and there's no one between you. You're just supposed to spread yourself out and say, oh, please hit me. What choice do you have?
Or in a 2-on-1 break or something like that.
Right. I mean, how many of those were there?
With Garrett Bartis obviously playing very well this season, where do you think the Comets are going to go in terms of goalkeeping? Is it difficult to even say at this point?
I think it is. I don't know what's available either.
Right.
I just don't know. And anybody you bring in is going to be... See, the part of the problem with Fort Wayne is all those guys that went to the AHL, how many of them came back and were the same player?
Not many.
But
physically or mentally, they were.
Right, but you don't have any choice. You got to let them go. So do you go younger? Because all those guys are going to want to go up, without a doubt. And then when they come back, are you going to be stuck in the same spot again, where oh crap, they're not the same. Or you go older and say, guys, we really want you here. We don't want you to go up. We want you to concentrate on here because it doesn't work. It just hasn't worked out for us, okay? And I think that's a legitimate thing to say. I don't know I really don't know how you emphasize that or make it stick so that it works.
That's tough to recruit, though, in the offseason. You say, no, the opportunities aren't going to be here. We want you to stick with us.
Everything is set up against you, essentially. People fail to realize that about the ECHL. There's a reason the Comets are the only team that's gone to the second round 4 years in a row. A lot of teams are either really good, look at Missouri, or really bad, look at Missouri. You know, there's a reason teams that have 50 wins very, very rarely win the league title in the playoffs. I mean, there's only been 3 out of 28 so far where the regular season champion has won the playoff title. So it's a balance, and I don't know that the Comets or anybody else has figured that out yet.
I'm glad that you're taking it this direction because I want to mention the A word, affiliation. Obviously, the Comets not affiliated this past year. Do you see that changing? What are the pros and cons if it were? What are the pros and cons of affiliation? Because I know fans out there always,
sure. Okay.
I feel like they clamor for it because
First off,
it makes some sense.
It does make some sense. It's easy to recruit because you can dangle that for your guys. Now, the problem is, the only AHL good player you're going to get is the goalie. The rest of them are not NHL prospects. They are more than likely free agents for the AHL team who they are stockpiling in case their pro signed players get hurt. And then you also get the guys they give up on, that they're just
last
burying.
year of the contract guys.
Last year of the contract, we don't want to see you anymore. We're tired of talking to you. Don't want to talk to your agent anymore. Goodbye. And yet they're complaining because you don't play them because you have the same problems with them that the AHL team had. How does that win? You know, that was the Colorado situation last year. Spencer Martin was definitively not ready to be an ECHL #1. And he showed it with his attitude and some things. And I'm sure he's grown up quite a bit since then. He's a 21-year-old kid, okay? Garrett Mears proved he could not play disciplined hockey. Cody Corbett, I don't know why they signed him. I really don't. That was a joke, but they were complaining because the Comets wouldn't play him after he gave up 4 goals in the first 2 games against Cincinnati. It doesn't make any sense. You have to find an affiliate that's going to work with you and not just because of you. Because AHL teams could give a crap about their ECHL teams. We know that. That's been proven again and again and again. The Comets have learned that with Florida. They learned that with Norfolk. They learned that with Colorado. It's a really dicey deal. I don't know what the best answer is. I really don't. You know, it was great when you had Roman Will as the goaltender. He was fantastic. He was a great guy to work with. He was a young kid who just wanted to get better, and he worked hard. And it works sometimes and it doesn't in others. You're never going to get 6, 7 guys who are all decent players either. You're going to get 2 or 3, and then the other 4 you got to deal with.
A couple of guys that are just playing out their deals.
Just playing out their deals, and they don't care. And I'm not saying that those guys weren't good guys, okay? They were really good guys. They weren't ECHL first-line quality players, which is what you're hoping to get from your affiliation.
Especially if they're taking those minutes.
Yes, and you wonder the contracts that some of those guys get. It's like, I hope you save a ton because you're going to need that money the rest of your life. You know, I really do for their sake.
For you, how do you look back on this season? Do you look back and say success, look back and say meh, look back and say, oh, what could have been? I mean, how do you look retrospectively at this past season? Because, like, as you mentioned, this is the Comets are the only team in the ECHL that have made the second round of the playoffs each of the last 4 years.
Yeah, and you got to look at it this way. They were 4th best team in the whole league, not just in the Western Conference, but the whole league. And you did it without your #1 goalie for 3 solid months. What other team could have survived that? You know, and they called up Garrett Bardis, which Gary had planned from July last year, and it worked. I mean, that was amazing. I mean, man, he should get another contract just for that move. And because he thought about it ahead of time, because he knew Pat would get called up, you know, sometime.
Right.
And he had his ace in the hole. I mean, how many other coaches are pulling that kind of stuff? You know, he's the guy who saw that Jason Binkley could be really good. Nobody else did. Everybody else, like, I'm not training camp, was like, why did they keep him? You know, and he proved it. He became a really good player. You know, there's Curtis Leonard, Mason Baptista, Gabriel Desjardins. I mean, there are guys there who nobody else saw anything out of, and they really carried this team, that group did. They really did. Now, they didn't put up all the points and everything, but they gave you the most consistent effort every night. So it is the ECHL, folks. It's not designed to have continual success. It's just not.
Every year is its own compartment.
Entity. Yes, every year you have to start from scratch. Every year, no matter how many guys you bring back, no matter who your goalie is, you have to start from scratch, rebuilding from day one.
Final question, what are you most looking forward to about this offseason for the Komets as they move forward, they look to improve the franchise, look to improve the roster heading into the 2017-2018 season? What are you most looking forward to about this season? What are you most curious about as well?
Well, I think they'll hire a full-time assistant coach, which will be big. I don't know who that'll be. At least they have the option. Last year they didn't have the option. I mean, Shappy didn't even let him know he was leaving until Labor Day, and by then everybody else was signed. Or they would have signed Rod Aldoff. Oh, he's the head coach in Norfolk, can't do that. You know, I mean, you know, there's so many options they could have had earlier if he would have let them know, but he didn't. I want to see who they bring back too, just like everybody else. I want to see who they decide not to bring back. Maybe that's more important. And it's not because they don't like the guys. It's because they don't have any options. They've only allowed 4 veterans, and traditionally they have chosen to go with 3, which means they can spread that money out a little bit more over some of the other guys and maybe get a little bit more quality. That's how they got Bobby Shea this year. I want to see if I want to see who retires, and maybe does somebody go back to school? You know, does somebody decide, hey, I'm getting married this summer, we want to start a family, that's enough? You know, I mean, there's all that kind of thing, which have nothing to do with the things on the ice at all. Nothing. And we'll see.
Yeah, we will see.
There's a lot going on.
There really is a lot of decisions to be made as this franchise looks to go from good to great. I think that's the thing that we're really want to see under Gary Graham, because they have been good, but they've got to be great to beat Toledo and advance in the playoffs.
And that may never happen. It might be that next year Indianapolis is really good and Toledo takes a dive. You don't know. No, I'm sorry, but you don't know in this league. Look at Missouri last year. I mean, look at the teams. Cincinnati 2 years ago was really good. Reading 3 years ago was really, really good. And where are they now? You know, I mean, that is this league. There is no continuity for quality of play. That's just the way it is. Everybody points to Allen. Yeah, the Western Conference, I'd love to play Tulsa and Wichita and Idaho and Utah so much, you know. And now how are they doing against Colorado? They're coming back a little bit, but you can't, and even they've turned over their roster completely almost. You know, they've got 2 or 3 guys that are the same, and that's about it. You know,
it'd be nice to see the Comets play Toledo more than 6 times while they play Quad City.
My God.
12.
Yes.
That's a whole nother conversation.
No. That's a legitimate conversation.
I think it's very logistically. I guess I don't understand it.
The fact that you only played Toledo 2 times here is an absolute disgrace. That is a disgrace. The league needs better than that.
Well, we appreciate all your time every Monday here on Inside the Zone for the past season. It's been a pleasure.
What is this, 15?
Oh, gosh.
15 on 15, or is next year 15 on 15?
Oh, gosh. Well, we probably did it in 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
But
we're old.
No, it never gets old. It never gets old talking with Blake, because we appreciate all the knowledge that you bring, and it's been fun. And hopefully we'll be back here next year talking more Komets hockey, maybe a championship. Who knows?
You never know. I mean, the thing is, it's like in pro football, everybody starts off with hope. But there's legitimate hope. You know, I mean, the Komets will always be competitive. Now, whether they can take that next step for a year, you don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. But they will be competitive because they're going to outwork everybody.
I keep saying it, but it's good to great. I mean, they are a good franchise year in and year out. They just they want to take that next step to great.
And it's the hardest step they've had to take.
And we've seen them do it in years past, and maybe this is the offseason to get it done yet again. For Blake, I'm Glenn. We'll see you later right here on Wayne.com.